Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our last class, believe it or not, before the final exam. So, this is for Monday, the 6th of May, where we are putting some closure on Othello, which has been called perhaps Shakespeare's most disturbing tragedy. Certainly, it's a personal tragedy. As scholars have noted, it's a tragedy of the bedroom. It's not of the stateroom or the war room, which makes it, I think, very personal and makes it very contemporary. I think you probably saw and experienced the multiple parallels with Much Ado About Nothing, the importance of reputation, the rumor of female infidelity that is untrue. But in this case, we have a tragic ending because the truth is revealed too late, and ultimately that results in Desdemona's murder by Othello. Now, that said, this play can't really be discussed without talking about issues of race. And in addition to racism and sexism and domestic violence, one of the more disturbing things about the play is that past performances of Othello have cast Caucasian actors in the role of Othello, sometimes even wearing blackface. And as you know, I had suggested to you that you listen to the audio version of Othello, mostly because I wanted you to experience the Archangel series of audios. And below, I've got some clips for you to watch of different versions of Othello. They're short clips. The first is with Laurence Olivier, a Caucasian actor who was basically put in blackface. This was in 1965, so I think it says a great deal about the time period. It's a 3-minute clip. It used to be considered the definitive Othello. Orson Welles, who you might know from Citizen Kane fame, also did Othello. In 1952, another Caucasian actor would use makeup to darken his skin, and that's 1 minute long. His Othello actually is quite avant-garde. And if you know anything about Orson Welles, his filmmaking is rather avant-garde. Now, the BBC, which might be something that you are remembering from a previous class, you'll remember that we saw the BBC version of Richard II, the BBC putting all of Shakespearean plays as close as possible to the actual text itself. And the BBC also, unfortunately, put a Caucasian actor in the role of Othello. That happens to be Anthony Hopkins. That's a 2-minute trailer that I'd like you to watch. What's interesting about this particular version of Othello is that as the play progresses, you can see the actor becoming more bestial, as his hair becomes more disheveled, for instance, and his makeup becomes darker. Now, more recent productions of Othello have cast black actors in the role of Othello. And Othello is a Moor, a member of the Northwestern African Muslim people of mixed Berber and Arab descent. In other words, he should be dark skinned, as opposed to the Desdemona, who is called pale and fair. And a couple of trailers for you to look at. One by The Globe on screen. And of course, we began the semester with The Globe on screen, trying to put Shakespeare's performances in the context of the Globe Theater, or as close to the Globe Theater as we can get. This is 1 minute long from 2008, where you'll see Eamon Walker play Othello, and a black actor. Kenneth Branagh, a name again you might recognize because of his work with Much Ado About Nothing, and we saw that production and the Hollywood version of Much Ado About Nothing, and perhaps Kenneth Branagh is our modern Shakespearean. I'm very pleased to say that Lawrence Fishburne was placed in the role of Othello. Kenneth Branagh placed himself in the role of Iago, and of course, as you know from reading the play Othello, Iago is really perhaps the most fascinating character of the play, which I'll get back to in a moment. In 2009, the black actor James Earl Jones read a passage of Othello, an evening of poetry, music, and the spoken word. This is a 6-minute long speech that he was performing to, among others, President Barack Obama and his family. So by seeing all of these clips, you'll be able to see that they're very different versions of Othello, just like they're very different versions of all of the plays that we've seen. We're now at the point of the semester where you have some familiarity with reading Renaissance English. You have some familiarity with different kinds of productions. So what I ended up doing was giving you the opportunity to listen to a lecture from Harvard University from a noted Shakespearean scholar about Othello, asking you to watch that. And as you can see, many of the themes of Othello, such as race and love and jealousy and order and chaos and honesty and falsity, self-knowledge, honor, reputation, are all very contemporary. Definitely, this is a play that talks about women's rights and the role of female. It's a very interesting subject matter in this play where we can see strong women in a Desdemona who stands by Othello even though she's been wronged, or also by a Iago's wife who demands the truth be revealed regardless of the consequences. You are going to see lots of dark and light imagery in this play in order to reinforce the themes of light and dark and good and bad and black and white. Lots of animal imagery as well. The idea of the humanity of Othello being stripped away so he becomes a base animal. Certainly, there is a difference between reading a play and watching a performance or listening to a performance. And in the version that I had you watch, or I should say listen to, you obviously didn't see any of the action because I wanted you to concentrate on the language. And as good as the Harvard presentation is, they barely discuss one of the most famous scenes in the play in Act 3, Scene 3. We talked about the pyramid structure of Shakespearean dramas, and that the Act 3 would be the pinnacle of the period. That's where it would be the height of marriage. Or the height, I should say, of tension. And this scene is known as the marriage scene between Othello and Iago, where Iago finally convinces Othello to take action. And they're kneeling actually in front of one another. It's almost as if they are exchanging vows. This is in Act 3, Scene 3, line 463. And I don't think the Harvard presentation on Othello, again, as good as it is, talks about some of the subtleties of racism. I don't know if you're familiar with the more contemporary drama by Lorraine Hansberry entitled A Raisin in the Sun, which was written in the 1950s about a black family moving into a Caucasian neighborhood and the obstacles they experienced in trying to do so. The play is about lots of other things too. I highly recommend that you read this play because there is a wonderful line in there that always reminds me of Othello. And it is when one of the characters is expressing, one of the black characters is expressing her disbelief and dismay about why there's so much opposition from the Caucasian neighbors in this new neighborhood that the black family is going to be moving into. Why there's so much dismay that this black family is moving into the neighborhood. And one of the characters asks sarcastically, well, what are they afraid of? That we're going to eat them? And the response from another family member is, no, that we're going to marry them. And that is the line that basically is crossed, which we see with Othello. Othello has earned respect and admiration, maybe even friendship, but once he's decided to marry the Desdemona, that's when he's gone too far. And in fact, if you read A Raisin in the Sun, there is a neighbor by the name of Wilhelmina Othella Johnson. And Othella is a play on Othello, Othella being the feminine version of Othello, and Wilhelmina being the feminine version of William Shakespeare, who wrote that. So, as you know, this is an uncomfortable play. There is ugly, vulgar language. It begins right at the beginning of the play. Roderigo, for instance, using racial stereotypes, talking about the thick-lipped one. Act 1, Scene 1, line 66. Iago continues shortly thereafter in Act 1, Scene 1, line 88, that there's an old black ram cupping a white ewe, in reference to Othello and Desdemona, and that they are, quote, making the beast with two backs. Act 1, Scene 1, line 116. Again, bestial animal imagery. Lots of prose passages as well, and we know that poetry oftentimes is reserved for more eloquent or advanced elements in a play, oftentimes to illustrate an advanced status. The prose is oftentimes associated with that which is further connected with reality. We saw how Much Ado was in prose. In this instance, those prose passages illustrate the ugliness of an Iago. Brabantio even talks about the sooty bosom of Othello in Act 1, Scene 2, line 70, once he finds out that his daughter has been married to Othello. And we know the consequences of a woman marrying without her father's position or permission, let alone a woman marrying a black man. So that's the context of this play. One of the brilliant elements of this play is Iago's ability to manipulate. Iago is basically the Don John of Much Ado About Nothing, but he's much more intelligent, and he also is much more dangerous. And one of the things that Iago is able to do, Iago's been called Shakespeare's most consummate villain, and I think there's a certain level of truth to that. But Iago knows how to identify psychological weakness within his characters and be able to utilize that for his advantage. He oftentimes uses the truth in order to sow doubt among characters. We see this where he basically says that, and Brabantio says it too, that she's deceived her father and may thee. It's something that plants a seed in Othello's mind that continues to grow like a cancer. Iago says later, so Brabantio says that in Act 1, Scene 3, line 292. Iago says something comparable in Act 3, Scene 2, line 206. She did deceive her father marrying you. Iago comes with the title of honest, as you know that Don John came with the title of bastard, and he really was in Much Ado About Nothing. Iago's anything but honest, which makes you wonder how he earned that title. Was he able to deceive everyone prior to the play? But he does show an ability to be a master manipulator. He knows that Cassio's weakness is drunkenness, so he uses that against Cassio. And of course, Iago has some desire for revenge against Cassio because Cassio has been given a promotion that Iago thinks he deserves because Iago has experience rather than book learning. Roderigo, of course, has lust for Desdemona, so Iago is able to manipulate that by getting profit off of Iago. Othello, of course, is insecure in part because he's a Moor and in part because he doesn't have experience with romance. His only experience is as a soldier, and Iago uses that insecurity against Othello. And, of course, Iago knows that Emilia, his wife, has desires to please Iago, and he can use that so that he can get what is perhaps the most famous prop in theater, the handkerchief. Without this handkerchief, everything falls apart. We could talk quite a bit about motivation, and definitely there is this idea of sport also involved with profit. So yes, Cassio received the promotion. Yes, Roderigo has money. There is reference, though it's only once, that Emilia was rumored to have an affair with Othello, but it's never followed up on. So despite these possible motivations, it just seems that Iago, like Don John, is a plain dealing villain and enjoys creating havoc. Again, one of perhaps the more surprising things about Shakespeare was how progressive and modern he is, and that's in reference to women's rights. Just some of the lines that I wanted to point to in Act 3, Scene 4, line 103, when Emilia and Desdemona are speaking to one another alone, so they can be honest. This is girl talk, in effect. And Emilia says that men are stomachs, basically, and they belch out women. Again, think about all of this bestial, animalistic appetite imagery, appetite in the negative in this instance, and also putting the blame on men. Desdemona follows in Act 4, Scene 3, line 86, by saying it's a husband's fault if wives do fall. Again, very progressive idea. This is a play where men treat women terribly. Iago treats Emilia terribly. Othello treats Desdemona terribly. Even Cassio treats Bianca terribly. Um, and again, as I was suggesting with examining the characters of Emilia and Desdemona, both can be seen as strong or both can be seen as weak or a combination of the two. Um, Probably one of the more difficult things to accept as a modern audience is that Desdemona continues to try to protect Othello right to the bitter end. And again, echoes of domestic violence run throughout this particular play about protecting one's abuser. Um, and of course, Othello's rationalization for needing to kill Desdemona is ridiculous. Act 5, Scene 2, line 6. Yet she must die, else she betray more men. Othello's final speech and his ultimate suicide. Remember that I've done the state some service and they know it in Act 5, Scene 2, line 339. So at this point, we can see either Othello's actions as heroic because he is willing to take perhaps some level of responsibility and admit that Desdemona was indeed innocent and pure, or we can see it that he refuses to take responsibility because his last words are to remember him as he was, a great warrior, not as he became. And the act of suicide, as is seen in Oedipus the King, which is what created the idea of tragic hero and tragic character, is seen more as an act of cowardice than an act of bravery. If you haven't figured it out, that'll be today's attendance question. Our last attendance question, by the way. That would be due on Wednesday. Do you think Othello can be considered a tragic hero, and why or why not? And I've asked you this question about Macbeth, and I've asked you this question about Richard II, and now we're putting some conclusion onto Othello as well. And as you know, if you were looking at the syllabus, you would see that I had assigned one play as an extra credit play. You're not required to read it, but it is The Tempest. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the genre in which The Tempest falls. There is another genre to Shakespearean plays. We've talked about comedies. We've talked about histories. We've talked about the very famous tragedies, but we haven't talked about the tragic comedies. And the tragic comedies are thought to have been written at the ending of Shakespeare's career, and they merge elements of tragedy, the darkness that you assume with the tragedy, as well as some of the lightness of the comedies, that ultimately there is no death. And it's thought that The Tempest is Shakespeare's last play before retirement. It's one of the reasons why I had wanted us to talk a little bit about The Tempest, because in many ways our major character, whose name is Prospero, could be seen as a stand-in for Shakespeare himself, basically saying goodbye to his audience. And Prospero is a master manipulator, much like Shakespeare is a manipulator. What's also interesting about The Tempest is that Shakespeare, throughout his writing career, violated many of the Aristotelian elements associated with creation of drama, not just in terms of tragedy and tragic character, but there was also an idea of keeping to the unities. That, in other words, drama should be as realistic as possible. Therefore, they should take place over the runtime of the performance, 2 to 3 hours. Therefore, they should take place in one locale. So once we've established that the stage represents a particular locale, we shouldn't be shifting. So that would be keeping to the unity of time and place. Of course, if you think about just the few Shakespearean plays we've read this semester, they don't keep to the unity of time, nor do they keep to the unity of place. The Tempest does. However, Shakespeare's last play, it takes place over the course of the performance of the play in one locale, an island. And it is indeed about a tempest, a storm, which is what tempest means, that shipwrecks everyone on an island. And they believe that parts of their party have perished in the storm. So they're basically believing that they're on their own and trying to form civilizations and alliances within their own groups. And The idea that the Tempest can keep to the unity of time and place is oftentimes seen as a way for Shakespeare to sort of state to his audience that I could have kept to the unities of time and place if I wanted to. I just didn't necessarily feel like it, much like he could have kept to the strict definition of tragic hero. He just didn't necessarily feel like it, which is why talking about tragic hero is so interesting with Shakespeare, because he ultimately took some liberties. So that said, there is another kind of performance that I wanted to draw your attention to, and they are Shakespeare's Animated Tales. And it was a series done by HBO in which they animated Shakespeare's tales in about 25 minutes or so. The idea is that the tales were meant for children, but I think they also serve nicely in terms of summarizing plots for adults as well. And you can find, for instance, Macbeth, if you wanted to, as a Shakespeare animated tale. I included The Tempest as a Shakespeare animated tale in the event that you wanted to watch it. That's 25 minutes, so it obviously is leaving a lot out, but it will give you an idea of the main points of the play itself. And you're at the point in the semester where if you wanted to see a performance, you know that you could watch a BBC performance, for instance, or you know that you could watch a performance from the Globe, or you know that you can listen to an audio performance by Archangel. But I just wanted to expose you to yet another way that Shakespeare could be performed, and that's through the animated tales. So I encourage you to watch that. Of course, you know The Tempest is our extra credit, but what I will be doing is putting an extra credit question on our final examination so that you can earn some additional points. So our final and paper number 2, and you can see this in the section labeled as 10 in the notes below. That paper number 2 is going to be due on the very last day of class. For us, that happens to be at Wednesday. I would say that Wednesday at 8:30 a.m., which is when I'm going to be posting the final, is when you should have paper number 2 in if you haven't already submitted it. And you should also have any revisions for paper number 1 if you elected to do so. Please remember to submit in the original along with the revision, and I can compare and contrast the 2 grades. Please send that via PDF to my email, ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. That leaves you free and clear at that point to take the final examination. And if we were taking this class in person, I would have you spend approximately 2 hours taking the final, but we are not taking this class in person. We are taking it online. So I will give you 24 hours in which to respond to the final. So the final will be posted on Wednesday and will be due on Thursday. I'll post it Wednesday, 8:30 in the morning. It'll be due on Thursday by 8:30 in the morning. And that is the very ending of our semester. So in terms of final grades, you should be able to access final grades on my GCC by May 16th, or contact me at that point if you haven't received your grades so that I can send them to you. But again, if you go onto my GCC, you should be able to access those grades. And in terms of thinking about our attendance question, again, which would be due on Wednesday the 8th, do you think Othello should be considered a tragic hero, and why or why not? Again, no right or wrong answer, just something for you to debate and perhaps even to contemplate as a possible paper number 2 topic. And I'm hopeful at this point you have finished reading Othello and that you are coming to closure with paper number 2 if you haven't already done so. One thing that I forgot to mention about Othello, I realized that you might find interesting, is actually it was recommended to me by one of my students. It's a very short YouTube video that tries to talk a little bit about some of the major themes in Othello through a spoken word performance. So you don't necessarily need to watch that, but I encourage you to watch that because I think it's quite fascinating in terms of the way that Othello can be viewed in contemporary times. The only thing that's left, as you will see at the very ending here, is I have a farewell message to you from a friend of mine. So you can click on that and get your farewell. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, And on Wednesday by 8:30 a.m., I will have the final exam posted, and I am looking forward to receiving your paper. Take care. Bye-bye.